Hey, I'm Robert, Cooksaw Manufacturing. We've got a new series of videos that we're starting. I just want to get some feedback from the guys that are watching our videos. This video goes into a lot of depth, a lot of detail. We've got a lot of history, a lot of stories. So I want to get some feedback if you're looking for more in-depth, more understanding, or if you're wanting more of the rapid fire, quick answers, let's get it back up and running with a limited understanding on it. So we appreciate you watching our videos, and if you don't mind, just give us some feedback, help us to kind of cater to what you're looking for in the future.
Hey, I'm Robert, Cooksaw Manufacturing. I've got Mr. Tim Cook here with us today. We've got some questions on some saw blades we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about broken saw blades. If you've ran a sawmill, you've come across broken saw blades. It's part of it. We want to know why they're breaking, and we want to know what we can do to prevent them from breaking prematurely, how to get more life out of them. So, Mr. Tim, Mr. Tim does own the company. I work for Mr. Tim, but he has a lot of knowledge. He's been doing this for a long time. I think he told me he's been doing it for a little bit longer than forever. So a lot of knowledge with those saw blades. But what is the first thing I'm looking for when I have a broken blade on my sawmill?
Okay. I'm going to answer some of Robert's question, or at least his insinuations. You see this gray hair. So this gray hair come from dealing with saw blades, I think. But my dad had the business going when I was 12 years old or so. And by the time I was 16, I was carrying on the work of a grown man right there beside all the other men. And so I've applied that to my whole life. And probably in the early 90s, it became bandsaw only. We were circle saw, the big sawmill saws. I've learned to hammer the saw blades and all of that. But by the early 1990s, it turned into pretty much bandsaws only. Now, we did wide bands before we did the narrow bands. We did blades that were 12 inches wide in our saw repair business. I'm talking about 12 inches wide bandsaw blades, 36 feet long, sometimes 40 something feet long. But so we applied that knowledge when it came to this, what we call the thin kerf bandsaw business, from 1 inch all the way up to 2 inches, where that category lies. And so a lot of that knowledge that I gained from the circle saws and the wide bands was transferred over into the thin kerf. However, there's some differences in there, and we'll talk about some of them today as we get into his question. And the question was, what makes a bandsaw break? And that's a pretty deep subject, okay? So I begin when I say, well, a customer calls in and says, why is my saw blade breaking? Why is this breaking? Why is that? And every case is a little bit different. And so we have to consider all the factors. First thing I think of is, what is touching this bandsaw blade? Because if it don't touch the blade, it don't have a lot of effect on it. And so I'm thinking, we got 2 band wheels and we got 2 guides. That is definitely making contact with the blade. So once I have that concept, well, there's one other thing that makes contact, and that is the log, or the wood that we're going to saw. It could be a resaw and you're sawing pallet stock. It could be dry wood. It could be dried hickory. It can be maple. There's just a lot of different things. If you're up in northern Michigan, you're going to swear that maple is the hardest thing to cut, and I couldn't argue that point. Down here in the South, it may be hickory or dried white oak, and you know, we think that's the hardest thing there is to saw. And then you get a guy with the frozen logs, and that becomes the hardest things to saw. So a lot of variables in there. But the logic that's behind what makes this bandsaw stay together pretty much applies to all the categories, and time becomes a big factor involved there.
Right.
So we kind of have to take a segment and say, all right, let's talk about band wheels. You know, how will a band wheel make a blade break sooner than later? And so then you have to talk about bandsaw. But the biggest thing I'll talk about at this point, I think on a later video, we may get into the types of bandsaw wheels, what works better, and that kind of thing. But right now, I will tell you that wheels that are out of round and not true are what breaks a lot of blades. Now, I'll try to describe that. If I got a wheel over here that's out of round by 15 thousandths and a wheel over here out of round by 15 thousandths, and you put that in unison, that almost seems like it would stay together. However, if you mark that wheel and watch that band, you'll find that after a while of rotating, they're going bang, 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 bang. That's 15 thousandths for this wheel, 15 thousandths for that wheel, and it's going bam, bam, bam. You'll see that mill cycle, and it starts shaking like this, and then all of a sudden it goes, calms back down. Well, that's when they're back in unison doing this. But one wheel, all it has to be is a fraction bigger than the other wheel. And it may have been made 2 hours before that wheel on the wheel grinding machine or the wheel lathe, or it may have been made on machine A and B made the other wheel. You know, a lot of things variable, but I've never seen two wheels that were absolutely the same diameter and trueness. So that banging is like boom, 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 boom. And that is 30 thousandths. 15 plus 15 is 30 up here where the band comes across here, and add that to what goes here. So we're stretching the band here, stretching the band there, 30 thousandths plus 30 thousandths. We're trying to stretch that band a 1/16 of an inch at a shock load. I mean, it's like boom. And what you have then, the molecules of the band, if you'll imagine two magnets, you put two magnets together, it takes a certain amount of strength based on the type magnet and the type pressure, or the amount of pressure you put on it, and you pull, 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 and boom, they come apart. Same thing with the molecules of the steel. It's similar to magnetism. The molecules are together, but at a certain amount of pressure, they come apart. And that's what's happening with a bandsaw blade. So technically, the molecules can't hold together anymore, breaks blades. Now, let's just say a scenario, we got true wheels, and the wheels are very true. We don't have this banging. That machine just sits there. It don't vibrate and then stop. It don't cycle. It just sits there smooth. And that is true, what true wheels will do. I'll throw this in here at Cook Saw. We have built grinding machines, and we grind steel wheels absolutely true, just like you'd grind a crankshaft on a car engine or any kind of engine. We grind them wheels absolutely true, so we don't have that banging, cycling effect. We eliminate that one, and that's out of the picture. However, I see a lot of mills out there that don't have that going on, and then that causes a lot of band breakage. So now let's go to the guides. Well, there's roller guides, there's sandwich guides that hold a blade like this. There's guides that have a backup bearing back here that spins. There's guides that have a flange on them, which is what we use, and we like that pretty well. It has its service and does a great job. And then there's a few guides out there that has a rub block where that band comes back against the back, and I'll just describe that as coming back against it, and it rubs on the back. And so I can give you some things that will accelerate blade breakage. If you have something rubbing the back of that blade, it'll cause that blade is traveling somewhere around 55 miles an hour. It could be a little faster than that or a little slower depending on horsepower and type machine, but it's rubbing back here. So just imagine you're driving a pickup truck, you drop a chain out of the back of that truck from the bumper. Is it going to make sparks when it hits the pavement? Everybody's going to say, yeah, it will. It would glow. It would just be sparking like crazy in the dark. Well, I've actually seen a few of that happen where somebody's chain was dragging the ground. Right. That same thing with the back of this blade. This back of this blade is coming by here so fast that in less than 20 seconds, and I'm not really putting an accurate time frame on that, but in a very short time, the back of that blade turns red hot, and the air chills it down, and it crystallizes the steel, and it causes micro fractures all in the back of that blade. You can bow that blade hard like that and see those micro fractures. That is one method of a blade just destroying itself. So a backup guide that is not spinning is the worst kind of backup guide you can have. Now, we can also talk about guides that hold a blade like this. It sandwiches the blade. So it is usually steel. However, I see some composite guides out there, and it holds it here. The pallet industry uses that quite a bit. Some people have tried to use that on sawmills, and so I put those and categorize them. My belief is roller guides with a backup flange being part of that roller is the best thing for sawmills, bar none. Then when you go to resaws, Sandwich guides have their place in working better. However, sometimes roller guides work better there as well. But I'll give you the scenario where the sandwich guides do work and they work sufficiently and give good production. That is when you need to get close to your product with a sandwich guide. You can tell that I can get closer with a sandwich guide to the product, and so I can have a 4x4 or a 4x6 coming through here, and it's very close. That blade has very little room for deviation when we do that.
Right.
So if we put roller guides on here, though, the center of the roller being over here, center of the roller being over here, it has put our point of contact much further apart, and we can't hold that blade quite as stable. In pallet resaws, the closer we can put those guides to it, we get more stability in that saw. Now, roller guides treat the blade better because the blade is rolling with this blade coming through. So that roller guide can spin as high as 10,000, 11,000. You have to do the math based on the speed of the band and the diameter of that roller guide, but it is spinning with it, so it's not creating the friction that you get from guides that hold like that. And also you can have lubrication that adds to reducing that friction on the blade, and that gives you a lot of assistance when you have sandwich guides. But if that sandwich guide binds that blade, or that blade tries to cut upward, it's pressing hard into that guide, and it not moving, it can crystallize the steel of that blade and cause premature breakage. So that's something that is of very much importance. In a case where the blade is not cutting straight in a resaw, I usually go to band wheel alignment. That'll be another conversation for another day.
Let's say we've got a customer. So we sell hundreds of sawmills, but we're selling thousands and thousands of saw blades.
Right.
So obviously all these saw blades are not going to our sawmills that have the steel wheels. So we've got a customer who calls in that's buying our band blades from us. And he broke a saw blade. Now this guy, he's running on the weekends. He's not a full-time sawyer. What are the first questions we wanna ask to figure out what his issue is?
I will pretty much start with, I need to get a picture of how true his bandsaw wheels are. May have to put a dial indicator on them. There are belted wheels out there that are not true. Belted wheels are never true. The belt becomes the shock absorber for that wheel, and so I want to consider that. That's the first thing I want to know about his guides. And one of the things I was about to talk about was the roller guides can get flat spots on them. There's wood that can jam that guide. It gets a flat spot, and then it becomes a hammer. It's going ba-da-da-da at a high rate of vibration.
Mm-hmm.
The harmonic vibration is detrimental to a bandsaw blade.
Can you hear that when it's sawing?
Well, the vibration, it's hard to hear it when you're sawing, but when it's out of the cut, it becomes very noisy.
Okay.
When it's in the cut, it kind of quietens off a little bit. If you have a blade that wants to saw and pull away from the guides, it gets real quiet, and then when you come out of the cut, the blade pops back up against the guides and makes a lot of noise again. That's right. So a blade that's diving down a little bit is kind of indicating to you it's pulling away from the guides. And so those are some signs. But I want to get a picture of how the blade is being treated. But when I want to find out what part of this blade broke first, I'm going to look at the break. I'm going to pull that blade up here, and here's the principle. The shiny part broke last. The dirty, darkest spot broke first. So if it's dark in the back and shiny up here in the gullet, then I know it broke in the back first, and the gullet is what broke last, and vice versa. If I look at it and it's a lot of dark material up here in the gullet area, and then I look back here in the back and it's shiny, I know that the gullet cracked first, and then the back gave way. So why that's important to me is the stress of sawing, the length of time that the blade has sawed generally breaks them in the gullet. Now, the reason that happens, I'm going to use my fingers to describe that. A blade under no tension is like this. Well, when we tension that blade up, we start spreading and putting stress on the molecules. We get it tight enough to saw, but when it hits the wood, it does this. It opens out more. And so it stretches, it saws through the wood, and then it comes back. It don't come all the way back, but it comes back to the stretch that we put on it. We come back and we saw again. So the gullet is getting more stress than the back of the blade under sawing conditions. So all the stresses that are happening to the blade will normally and most often crack in the gullet first. I gave you that case where something rubs the back of the blade, it causes crystallization. A point to remember too is any damage done to steel cannot be reversed.
Okay.
This is considered spring steel. It is very springy. It rebounds right back to where you put it. It's very strong. It's very rigid. So we stretch it, and if we don't overstress it, it comes back to where it was. If we overstress it, though, it's like a spring. I remember getting a whipping one time for having swung on a door, and I swung on the spring on the screen door, and it warped that spring. Well, don't you know I was trying to put that thing back together? It didn't work. I got that whipping anyway. But I learned not to stretch a spring too far because it's going to damage the spring.
Right.
So the blade is the same way. If we can not damage the springness that's in this blade, that blade will technically run forever. Now, we all know that's not happening. We are overstressing the steel every time we saw in general. Now, I've seen some guys, I call it the old man syndrome versus the young man. The young man's out here, he's trying to get at it. He's racing, he's going after it. He's wanting to saw as fast as he can, and he's got more pep in him. And the old guy's over here, he's putting a moderate tension on the blade. He ain't worried about nothing. He's just making fishing money. And so he's just sawing slow and easy, not pushing it hard, low horsepower. And he goes, I get 20 sharpenings out of my blades. And the young buck over here, well, I get 3. You know, well, the reason is stress. The young guy is pushing that thing. He's pushing it. The older guy's taking it easy on that blade, and that blade will last him right on. Same thing with your car, transmission, all those things, the same thing. It will last longer if you treat it good. But if you hoss it, the damage you do is irreversible. If you damage it in this 10 minutes, for the rest of that blade's life, it has that damage and you cannot reverse it out. No way.
So what should I expect out of a life of a blade? So how do I know if I'm getting the life I should see? Now we just talked about you'll see different lifetimes on different woods, how hard you're pushing it. But is there an average? Is there something we can kind of use to get an idea of what we should expect to see to know if we have a problem or not?
That's right. And here Robert is, he's the salesman for Cook Saw and sells Cook Sawmill. So Robert has an idea. If you don't push it too fast, you tend to take care of the blade, keep it sharp. Sharpness matters. If that blade is dull, it's putting more stress into the body of the blade. If the blade is sharp, there's less stress on that blade. So those are factors that come in. And so Robert can kind of say, well, on a Cook Sawmill, this is kind of what you can expect. And there's variables in there because of the way each person saws. And so, but it could be that on other brand mills, there may be less life. And some mills that are got bad guides and things that are rubbing the back of the blade, it pops them like popcorn. And so it doesn't matter what mill you have to experiment. You have to treat that blade moderate, don't overfeed it, and take care of that blade as good as you can, and you will come with an average of how long these blades will last. Until you change something physically, you're not going to get any more blade life than that. I have seen cases where people were pushing too hard, too fast, and I go, if you want more blade life, slow down. Everything is good. Your wheels are good. Your guides are good. Your tension's good. You're just pushing too hard. You're pushing too fast, and that was detrimental to the life. Now, I've seen people that say, I don't care. My production, that added production, buys me 5 more blades. Right. So I'll just go ahead and run that blade 2 times and break it, and I'll go on with life. And it's profitable for them to do that. So everybody's case is a little different. Some people have the mentality they cannot stand to see that blade break. They don't want to buy another 12 blades. And so they are wanting that blade to last for its fullest extent, and they will take their time to do it. That is their prerogative, and every one of us mentally are made different. So one guy's going to burn and just smoke and burn it. The next guy's going to take it easy, and he can tout how much blade life he's got. And so these are variables that come in there. So you have to kind of experiment to figure out where you're going to be and where it's going to be. Now we can analyze things. We can analyze it and say, okay, your wheels are out around, you're not going to get the best blade life. I'll tell you this, here's an absolute case. If the band wheels have belted tires in them and that wheel is out around by 15 thousandths,
Right.
that belt becomes a shock absorber. It is absorbing that shock that I told you about that happens when they're out around. So we're out around on this wheel, we're out around on that wheel, we're absorbing the shock of a 1/16 of an inch when this blade is going around. The only way we're going to change the life of that machine is to put a different kind of wheel on there. And this is something we do for many of the different mills that are out there. We sell wheels that fit a lot of those mills. You help sell those, and we grind that wheel true. We actually put the bushing in that you are going to receive, and you put it on a shaft. This is how adamant we are about how true that wheel needs to be. We put it on a true shaft. We grind that wheel true, and when we send it, we send that bushing with it. So when you put it on your mill, you now have a true set of wheels. That changes the entire personality of that sawmill. Blade life changes, sawing accuracy changes, and sawing faster changes immediately with true bandsaw wheels. When we're talking about band wheels too, the thought comes to my mind, the crown of the wheel. The crown of the wheel is very important. If it's too steep and sharp, it will cause a crack that will form in the middle of that band. It won't crack on the back and it won't crack on the front first. It will crack in the middle of the band first if it's too sharp. I've actually made wheels with it too sharp, and I witnessed just that happening. And I go back to a less crown, a more rounded, flatter crown with a radius that's a little different. And when we do that, then the blade life goes right back up again. So we've experimented with many things. You remember one experiment, don't you, where we changed the location of the crown? We didn't change the shape of the crown. We literally changed the location of the crown. And if I recall, do you recall, was it out in the front that we were too close to the front edge with the crown?
So when we were pulling on that blade, all of our stress was on that very front edge, and it was causing them to pop, I'd say, prematurely.
And they were breaking in the front, in the gullet.
To bring that crown back and put a little bit more even stress across the body of that blade.
So people want to know sometimes, how long can I run my band before I say it's dull, I need to take it off and sharpen it? As you may know or may not know, we really promote sharpeners. I built sharpeners before I built sawmills because saw blades is what I know best. And so the first thing I did in this thin kerf industry was I made a sharpener. Right. And we perfected that over the years, and it does a super job. And having that blade sharp is of the utmost importance. I'm going to go back to an old story that goes all the way back to my dad, and it was in the 70s, maybe even in the early 80s when this happened. But he was doing wide bands, and some of them were 4 inches wide, some were 6, some were 8. And he had customers who ran that blade 8 hours, and he would go to them and say, that blade is dull, man. You need to take it off. They go, it ain't dull. Watch this. And they would just peel off another board and it cut it straight. And he didn't know the term at that time to have said, it's too dull to continue on for the bandsaw blades concern. And that would have been the correct wording. But that blade would crack in many of the gullets all the way around the blade. It would crack. And my dad, he was one of those kind that he would not quit. I've seen him work all night long on bandsaw blades to give them back to the customer for them to do the same thing again. And so what was happening there, to make that clear, is they were running the blade too long, too dull for the life of the bandsaw blade. Okay. So they'd take a brand new bandsaw blade, run it, and the third time they run it, they would crack it in the gullets. And technically on those wide bands, you can run those. If it starts off at 6 inches, if you're running it right, it'll be 4 inches wide, and you're still running that blade. It's been through 50, 60 sharpenings. And so people were wondering, why can't I do that? Well, here's why. they ran their tension so tight that the band was so tight they could run a dull tooth forward. And so the stress in the gullet was more than the gullet could take, and it would pull that blade apart. It would crack in the gullet. If they carried on with it, it'd break the whole band completely in two, which is what we're doing in the thin kerf industry all the time. Every band meets its death in a breakage, generally speaking. So what and I'll tell you something else that happened in that part of the industry about that time. We would buy the bandsaw blades, sell them to the customer, and the customer didn't want to pay for them because they didn't get but 3 runs out of them and they were broke. And I told my dad, I said, we're going broke doing this. We can't do this. We got to stop selling bandsaw blades. And here was why. Because they were running the tension too high, running the blade too long, and cracking and destroying that blade. Now, my dad would get on it and he benched those blades, and so he would restore the body. He thought it was restoring. He was thinking, I'm restoring this body, but that wasn't what happened. The front got stretched on those blades and distorted. I'm going to use the term distorted. So the front got distorted more in the front than in the back. So my dad would get in there and bench that blade, and he would stretch the other part until it was distorted equally with the front. Now the blade's a flat blade, it's a good blade, and they would run it again and they would distort it again. So he distorts it, they distort it, he distorts it, they distort it, boom, it breaks. So distortion was why it broke. And so what we're, you know, and those sawmill people wanted some magic monkey dust to put on there. They wanted some kind of magic that we could perform that would make that blade last longer, and there was none. What they needed to have done was back their tension off, run that blade around 4 hours, pull it off, let us sharpen it. Then we would not have had to distorted the body to equal the distortion they put on it. So I'm now getting to a point that when you put a sharp blade on, the first 10 minutes, it's at its sharpest. We know it cuts superb. It's getting duller by the cut. Every cut you make, it gets a little duller, little duller, little duller. If you run that on too far, you've distorted your blade. If you distort that blade, then you're going to have problems with it from that point on, because we've already talked about you can't reverse that out. You can't take that back. It is done, and forevermore it's done.
So to get the most out of that blade, we need to pull it off while it's still sharp.
There has to be a reasonable amount of time that you saw, and you take it off and then you lightly sharpen it. You don't have to spend a lot of time with it. You can do it in 1 round if you don't run it too dull. If you run it extra dull, you got to go 2-3 rounds on the sharpener. But the key is keep the blade sharp. Each person will have to determine what makes it feasible for him. It's not feasible to change a blade every 10 minutes. That's a quite large exaggeration and you know, too conservative. But it also is not feasible to run it till it just destroys the body of the blade. And so that blade can be destroyed by running it too hard, too dull.
Too hard, too dull.
Too much tension, too hard, too dull can happen. So if you said, what's the formula for giving me the most life? I go back to the old man scenario. Run less tension, enough that it still saw straight, saw a little bit slower, keep that blade sharp. That would be your best case scenario.
For extending blade life.
That's correct.
And you gotta balance production versus blade life. If the cost of my wood I'm selling, is that worth more than the cost of the blades I'm buying? And there's a balance to that. For my hobbyist weekend warriors, generally they're going to want to see more life out of the blade.
That's correct. That's
The
correct.
guys that we've got running every day, sawing every day, 8 hours, 4 employees, they're pushing it hard. That blade is pennies compared to what they're getting out of it on the wood.
And it's going to cost you. Running a bandsaw blade is like putting fuel in a diesel engine or a gasoline engine. You put it in, you never go over and get some back out of the tank. You put more in. You put more in. Every day you run that machine, I don't care if it's a tractor, a car, or a truck, you're putting in. You're never taking out unless you're trying to rob a little bit to run an engine, a little small engine. So it is putting in. So you're going to buy blades. if you're cutting lumber. That's just the way it goes. We all, and I'm going to say, I'm very conservative in my life. I'm very conservative in what I spend money on and buy. I drive old model. Robert can attest to it. I drive old trucks, trucks that people won't help with and nobody else will drive. But I just want to get where I'm going. I need the truck to do work for me. I ain't worried about scratching. It's already scratched. I ain't worried about what it looks like. I just have to get from point A to point B. There's other people who prefer to buy a brand new truck and drive a real nice looking truck. And that's fine too. Everybody has their place and where they want to be. But I want to tell you that because I'm very conservative in most people's minds. And I realize there's somebody else out there that's more conservative than I am. And there are people who are more liberal with their spending than I am. But I think I'm conservative if you say that. So I want my blade to last as long as I can, and I don't want to spend no more money on that blade than I have to. Right. So I want to know, how is it that I can make this blade last a long time, and how is it that I can make the most money with that blade? I want to know that as well, because I want things to be profitable. And if it's profitable to me, push hard, I'm going to push hard and change blades. I'm going to push hard and put another blade on there and buy blades. So you have to find out where that is. I'll give you another story. Robert knows I'm full of stories because I think it's stories that help teach us lessons. But anyway, I had a customer who called me up. He had problems, couldn't solve. So I sent him, I said, I got some blades. I come to an understanding about his rotation, his meal. And I said, I got a blade I believe will work better for you. And so he ran the blades and he called me up. He said, I ain't going to buy no more of your blades. And so I said, well, why are you calling me? He said, well, they cut really good. And I said, wow, if they cut good, that has a value of some dollar amount. It is either pennies or it's dollars, one or the other. I said, we got to put a value on your better cutting. And I said, now, the value that you paid extra was, if I remember right, it was $3. $3 more for the blade that I sent him that cuts better. So I said, so what did that blade do for you? He said, oh, it cut fast and it cut straight. And I go, wow, that's worth a lot of money. And I said, let's put a dollar value on that. Now, if you get a miscut with that blade that don't cut as straight as the one I sent you, that miscut costs you money, don't it? And I said, so, yeah, it ruins the board. And I said, so at a high dollar value board, considering what is that board worth? And he concluded around $10 a board for some of the boards he's cut. I said, so if we miscut it, it costs you $10, right? He goes, yeah, I guess so. And I said, wow, that's a lot of money in a day's time when we're talking $3 difference. And I said, so saving you one board is worth more than $3, right? And he goes, well, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's right. And I said, so what else is good about it? He said, well, I saw faster. I said, faster has value because that means we're cutting more lumber at the end of the day. So I asked him, I said, how much lumber? He said, I saw right by myself. I said, how much lumber in a day do you cut more? He said, oh, 500 to 700 feet a day. I said, well, what do you charge per board foot? He told me that. I done the math. I said, you could buy 2 saw blades with that, you know? And so when I got through talking to him, he said, send me 12 more because he hadn't evaluated the value of what this blade could do for him versus the value of other blades. So we like to cut fast. We like to cut straight. And there are some variables in there. You know, that happens.
So we kind of talked about it a little bit, and I don't want to dive real deep into it on this video, but the different thickness and different sizes. So if I'm running a 1-inch blade at 35 thousandths, 1.25 inches at 42, 1.5 inches at 2 inch, generally we don't see 50, 55 thousandths on those. Is that going to have a factor on what I want to see out of a blade?
Yes. Yes and no.
We can cover a little bit deeper later on.
Yeah.
Because we want to talk about our super sharp versus some of the other blades available.
That's correct.
But just a general size comparison.
I'll try to break that down. And the reason Robert's he's kind of focusing me in, as you can tell, I can go off one direction and go for a while, and I can go off that direction and go for a while. I got a lot of knowledge, and I want to share it in a concise manner. And that's what I've asked Robert to do. You keep me focused because I can go off on a tangent. and I can go for an hour. But I'm trying to keep in focus here. So, in general, a bandsaw blade's width is how you get beam strength, and the beam means if I were trying to bend this blade this way or that way, the beam is pretty strong. Now, as you can see, I can easily bend it this way. And so the thickness of the band does have an effect on the beam of the blade, but the width has a little more effect on the beam. So in general, the 1-inch blades 035, the reason they use 035 in the resaws is to get that thinner kerf. And if they get the thinner kerf, sometimes that 30 thousandths means the difference of getting that final full board. A half a board is no good to anybody. So unless you got a market for a half a board. Uh, but a half a board, when you're trying to cut something 3/4 thick, is not a board for you that's sellable in a lot of cases. But if that board like 30 thousandths and you can add that 30 thousandths to it, that's one board per cant that's that size all day long. I've helped people out that I saved them 90 cents a cant, and they ran 300-400 cants a day. That's quite a bit of money at the end of the day, and that pays for a lot of changes too. So the beam strength will come in there, and some things you have to go with a thinner blade, a narrow blade, just because of what we're having to achieve in that cut. A lot of times people are thinking, I want to go from 1.25 inch to a 2-inch blade and solve all my problems, and that is not true either.
Right.
A 2-inch blade can be a nightmare if you don't know how to handle a 2-inch blade. We have another part to throw in here at some point, and that is what the diameter of the wheel does to a blade and the stress that it plays in part to stressing the blade and causing it to have problems. Again, that's going to have to be in another issue. So, but technically, the beam strength is what drives your blade forward. The next thing would be horsepower. You know, it doesn't make any sense to have a 2-inch blade and a 25 horsepower. It don't even make sense to have 1.5-inch blade and 25 horsepower sawmill. And I'm saying it that way to say some people don't need but a 25 horsepower on their sawmill, and 1.25-inch blade will saw everything they're needing to saw and do a good job. Some people want to saw faster, and so they want more horsepower. And so then it does make sense to go to 1.5 inches and on up to 2 inches in the cases that they're in. Each application can be different. But
Okay.
but I will say that the wider you go with a blade, there are some complications and stresses that can happen to the blade that happens before it breaks that will cause it not to cut straight.
So if we've got a wider, thicker blade, I can saw faster with it, but it's putting more stress on that curvature going around the band width.
That's correct.
So as a
Yeah.
just kind of gonna break it down a little bit. So as a rule, bigger blades saw faster, smaller blades get a little bit more life out of them. Would that be fair to say?
It could be a general statement, but it has some things that wouldn't be true about it, but some things that are true about it. But for instance, a pallet resaw is a 1-inch wide blade, and those are pretty high production. So it's a narrow blade, it's a thin blade, but yet it can be run at pretty fast speeds. It's kind of amazing, but we are holding the guides very close to the product. And when that blade gets dull, we're still sawing. I mean, we're tearing the wood out. One way or the other, we're ripping it out. You've heard the term rip saw? Well, it'll rip it. You know, it's a rip saw. So, yes and no, it's not really an easy one to answer.
Okay.
But if we're on a sawmill, if we're in the category of sawmill, then the wider that blade is, technically, the faster you can saw with it. If you have the horsepower to drive it, that's correct. But now, just because you want to run something that's wider and faster, don't necessarily mean you need to go to it, because you can bring on more complications with that. And the least complicated blade to saw with is 1.25 inch blade. It will saw without a lot of complications, and generally happens on a manual mill, something that's around 25 horsepower. We don't expect it to saw at the speed of light and leave no sawdust.
Got that NP32. It's got a 26.5 horsepower motor on it with 1.25 inch, and it was our super sharp. That is our best blade. I was pushing about 55 feet a minute.
Yeah, yeah,
It's all
yeah.
pine.
That's right.
Wasn't dried white oak, but it's all in pine. That's It's moving on one of these smaller manual mills.
That is correct, and it'll do it.
Before the blade.
It'll do it, and it's when the blade is sharp, and it will start from there and click, click, click. It goes down and gets slower till you say time to pull it off, put it back on, bring it back to that sharp state, and we reduce stress back to zero and go again. And that's how that works. That is a concept I hadn't mentioned. I kind of picture no stress or a blade that's sharp, cutting straight. It's good. It's at zero. But every minute you run that blade, it's clicking down and it's going downhill. The stress is getting greater, and at some level you got to stop. You can put that as an hourly time, or you can see how the blade's acting, and you just get a good feel for it, and it's time to pull it and sharpen it. And so you sharpen that thing. And it's easy done. It becomes pleasurable unless you let it make you despise doing it. And if you despise sharpening, it'll eat you up. But if you enjoy it because you know tomorrow you're going to go out and sharpen and cut lumber again, then it becomes a pleasurable event. I can say this, there's so many variables that we have to look at. I'm trying to teach principles as much as there is no absolute, okay? You have to keep your mind open so that you can see what is happening in this case versus that case. The other thing that we're making available here at Cooksaw is I'm going to be available to talk to people on the phone. I've done that through the years. I'm going to make that available again for people who need help, and I'll help you. I'm going to give you my cell phone number, and when you need help, you can call me. The only thing I do is say, just be respectful of my time as I will be yours, and that, and things will go well. But I can analyze what's going on with your product, with your meal, and we can help you with that. And so we're willing to, stick that out and do that. I used to do that a lot. I kind of gotten away from it. We're going to kind of move back to that again and do some of that, help people out with their meals. It don't matter if you bought our meal or somebody else's meal. That's not our concern. My concern will not be to bash a competitor or to cause any problems. I just want to get you running saw lumber at the best you can run. I do want to sell you some saw blades. That's how we make our living, is selling saw blades. And if you need a better sawmill, we're going to sell you a better sawmill, because we really put a lot of effort into making what we believe is the best sawmill for the application. And we've got mills from manually all the way to fully automated. We got computer set works on them. We got ergonomically operated machines. They work real easy. They're easy to work on. And here's something y'all need to know. When we build a mill today, the parts that we build today will fit the mills that we built 25 years ago. And you can keep that mill running no matter what. It's easy to do. I haven't met a case that I couldn't solve. I can work hand in hand with the customer, and I'll say, so we can solve. I can't just travel all over the country and help you, but I do know how to do it on the telephone. I can guide you step by step on how to fix that problem. And I've said this, and I still say it today. I have not found a problem I couldn't resolve yet. And I haven't. I can resolve that problem if people give me good facts, and if they were willing to change the things that are wrong. Now, sometimes we come to a conclusion, this is the best you're going to get with what you've got, and you say that's good enough. And that's good enough for me as well. But if you want to improve it, we can improve that. And so I've done that. The other thing that happens is in the wintertime, sawing is tough. You guys that are in the wintertime with your frozen logs, y'all have a tough period of time. And what I say to that is, when you learn to saw in the winter, you saw better in the summer. So I take those challenges, and I know how to saw winter frozen logs. I understand the principles that are there. There's a lot of principles that have to go through, but I can help direct you on what to do to saw winter logs, and it's very achievable. It is at a little slower pace than the summer. Summer saw's easier. And you got to know this, in Alabama, we don't have frozen logs. We thank goodness. But everybody deals with what you have to deal with. But somebody asked me one day, well, why do you think that you can help me and you've never sawed frozen logs? You don't saw frozen logs. And I say, well, it takes a thawed mind to figure this problem out. Just joking. I know that y'all know how to deal with that climate, just like we know in South Alabama how to deal with the heat, and we have to deal with a lot of heat. So everybody deals with their climate the best way they can, And but there are solutions to sawing frozen logs.
So, got another question for you. So, sawing, my blade breaks. I go look at it, and I find that it breaks right in the weld. What does that tell you?
It tells me that there was a weak weld. And we have some machinery actually that we designed and built that helps us make strong welds. Now, does that mean we will never have a problem? It does not mean that. There are occasions when a machine gets out of tune, it gets out of sync, it can be electronic. There's things that can happen and create bad welds, and it gets out the door before we can know it. And when it does, we make it good and we turn around and fix it. Now, the weld never is the strongest part of the blade. It's normally not. Now, some of the machines that we have built and we use in making that weld is superior to anything on the market. We don't show people what it is and don't tell people what it is because it's proprietary, but it makes that weld almost as strong as the rest of the body of that blade. I can't say that it's absolutely stronger, but it's almost. And so when it breaks in the weld and it's right down the center, you can't say anything but it was a weld break. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. Now, I have seen machines that find the weakness of a blade at rapid pace. That is one of them machines going bam, bam, bam. Your wheels are out around, your guides are in bad shape, and it's going to break somewhere. It will break somewhere. And if the weld is the weaker part of the blade, it can break them blades right in the weld and you can't stop it. Generally, you know that because everything you put on breaks like that. And sometimes it breaks in the weld, but sometimes it's breaking everywhere else in the same period of time. You can't necessarily blame the weld. But when you put blades on and they just pop in the weld, there ain't but one thing that's true about that, and that is the weld was not correct. And that's correct. That's right. The weld's just not correct.
We got a lot of checks. We got a lot of QC that goes into keeping that from happening.
Right. But it does happen. Yeah. I don't know of a bandsaw welding manufacturer out here anywhere that don't have the problem occasionally. And we all fight to keep that to a minimum so that it don't happen, and yet it sneaks up on you.
So, a lot of information, but to do a quick recap, when we're sawing and the blade breaks, first thing we do is we're going to go check on the blade, and we're looking, did it break in the weld, did it break in the body of the blade? If it broke in the weld, it's our blade, we stand behind our blade's columns. If it did not break in the weld, we're looking to see where it broke at. So we're looking right there at the inside of that break, and we're looking for the discolorations. We'll know if they're on the two side or the back side. If we find those discolorations on the back side, we're going to assume it's rubbing. It's getting heat. It's hitting something on the back side of the blade, correct?
Yep. Yep.
If we see those discolorations on the two side of the blade, we're gonna assume that's stress. It could be the band wheels pulling. It could be the dullness of the teeth of the tooth. Is that correct?
It could be that. That's right. And of course, we discussed the many things it could be, but when you see the break in the front, is what he's saying in this recap, then we're going to focus on stress. Whatever kind of stress it is, we want to focus on that. We'll also be focusing on what kind of time frame is this happening, and is it pretty consistent or not? That kind of helps us locate where the stress is coming from.
So if we've got the discolorations on the back, we can say that's heat, rubbing. If we've got it on the front, we can say that's due to stress of some sort.
That's correct.
Fair to say?
That's correct.
So once we identify, then of course we go to the machine and we start looking for our issues. Checking the band wheels for roundness, checking the roller guides for flat spots.
Flat spots. Yeah.
Flat spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we're looking to see if that blade's hitting on the back side. We talked about tension on the blade. So we want to check, make sure that we're not over tensioning our blade. And then we need to be mindful of how fast we're pushing it.
That's correct.
Now, if they're running that blade for 8 hours and it starts to crack and they're pushing as hard as you can,
we expect that blade to break like that.
That blade's just going to break.
Yeah, every blade has a given life. Yeah.
And the harder we're pushing, the faster we're cutting, that life certainly reduces. If you don't pull them off and sharpen them, they break.
That's correct.
That's just what happens.
Yeah.
if that blade's breaking within an hour, and it happens over and over again, is that something that we really need to stop when we start addressing
There's an
issues?
extreme stress somewhere that we got to locate.
Now, would you say somebody's just gotten into sawmilling, and they're running and they've broken one blade? So they're running 10 blades, um, getting 4 hours out of a blade, and they're sending them off to be resharpened. Everything's working good, and they break one blade. Would you can say that's cause for concern to go and start breaking down the sawmill?
Not at one blade. No, you're going to break blades, and for different kinds of stresses that come in, we're not going to try to worry too much about it, because it is going to happen. Blades are going to break. You can have a chunk of wood go between it and the wheel, and it stresses that one spot of that blade, and that blade's going to break pretty soon. So there's things that happen in there that will break a blade prematurely. That's not the blade, the fault of the machine or the blade. It just happens.
We're looking for consistency and patterns.
Looking
we
for
start
patterns.
tearing our machine down.
That's correct. That is
We're looking
correct.
to keep the blade sharp. We're looking to keep the blade tensioned properly. We're looking for true band wheels. We're looking for flat roller guides.
Yeah. And how straight the blade's cutting. I didn't cover that. That's another whole subject, but I will toss in that one of the questions we ask early on when a blade is sawing, and we're going to say, is it sawing straight? You know, your blades are breaking, but are they sawing straight? And sometimes they go, no, they're sawing terrible. Well, when a blade's not sawing straight, the first thing that I want to know, and really the only thing I want to know, is it going up first or down first? And there are some signs in there that show us what that is. It's very important to know which one it is. If you tell me that blade's going down first and I give you a solution that's that, but it was truly up first, you got an opposite answer to what's going to solve the problem.
And that's an alignment.
Well, it can be the blade. I mean, there's, again, many problems it can, but if it's consistent, we'll look to alignments of the mill. And that's a long subject.
Sawing straight, and then it starts diving down. It's putting a lot of stress on that.
A lot of stress.
Same thing when it goes up. If it's not in that straight line, bows up or down, that's putting a lot of stress, a lot of tension.
That is correct. So a straight cutting blade is what we're saying cuts the least amount of stress on the blade. If it's cutting straight, that's the least amount of stress we can have on a blade. So it's very important to us to have that blade cutting straight. We got to have a straight cutting blade. That everybody wants straight lumber, straight cutting blade.
Can't cut straight, gotta lose.
That's correct. And you know, if it ain't cutting straight, your whole mill's scrap iron. I mean, because of that blade.
Good.
That's right. And so we want to know what it takes to cut the blade straight, and we do know what it takes. So many factors, and we'll talk about that. I'll throw this one in that will be a subject we'll carry on later, but this is a good tidbit. The blade has no eyes. It can't see up. It can't see down. It does not know there is a knot coming. It does not see that the knot is smaller up or smaller down, which it's really not. And so I say this, the blade will saw to the least path of resistance. We must have eyes to see what that least path of resistance is. So if the mill alignment is of such and the blade is of such that the blade goes in and climbs first, that is because the least path of resistance is up. If I send you a blade that cuts faster because of tooth design and steel design, it's gonna cut worse than the blade you're using now, because the alignment says we're gonna saw up and the blade will saw to the least path of resistance. And if this blade's cutting to the least path of resistance faster, we got a problem that's worse than before. So alignment becomes very important to us. If that blade is going down, I'll give you a scenario there. If it goes down first, it is because when it hits that knot of stress and adversity, it is going to go to the least path of resistance. I'll tell you this, in the column that knot is in, an inch down, an inch up, it's as hard up here as it is down there. There's no difference. So going up does not give that blade relief. It puts it under a greater strain. Going down, same thing. So going straight through that knot is the easiest thing on the blade that can happen. If the alignments are correct, the blade is sharp set and ready to saw, it will saw straight through that knot faster than it can saw up through the knot or down through the knot. That comes down to what he mentioned, what Robert mentioned was mill alignment. And we know what to do with that and how to show you what to do
Touch
there.
on that a little bit.
That's right.
We may go out to a sawmill and look at one of those.
That's what we'd have to do. Yeah,
Uh,
we'd have to do that.
So breaking blades, it's got to be sharp. Band wheels have to be round. Roller guides have to be flat. Tension has to be correct, and we got to know if it's cutting straight. Wavy blades going to cause more stress. So there's some things that we're going to look at. Of course, we're looking to see if it's broken the weld or not. But a lot of information on a lot of different topics. Anything else you want to add?
That's the basis of what our subject was today.
We'll be having we're doing some more videos. So if you have any ideas on topics, anything you're struggling with that you'd like to see us cover, please comment, email us, call us, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. We appreciate you watching our video, the young guy and the old man.